Warning: the following story contains descriptions of graphic violence. Viewer discretion is advised. This is the case of Randy Kraft. Randy Stephen Kraft was born in Long Beach, California on March 19, 1945, the fourth child and only son of Opal Lee and Harold Herbert Kraft. Kraft's father had moved to California from Wyoming weeks after the American entry into World War II. Upon finding employment as a production operative at Douglas Aircraft Company, he was joined by his wife and three daughters. The Kraft family lived modestly, and Kraft's mother took several jobs to supplement her husband's assembly line salary. Kraft's mother initially found employment as a seamstress in a Westminster garment factory before later obtaining employment as a cook in a local school. Nonetheless, Opal Kraft always found time for her children. In contrast, Kraft's father seldom attended any social gatherings with them and was later described as being distant from his family. As a child, Randy was doted on by his three sisters and mother, although he was known to be accident-prone. In 1948, the Kraft family moved from Long Beach, California, to Midway City in neighboring Orange County. Their home was a small wood-frame Women's Army Corps dormitory on Beach Boulevard that Kraft's father renovated into a three-bedroom house. The family became active in the Westminster First Presbyterian Church, with Kraft's mother rising to the chairman of the Deacons Committee. In Midway City, Kraft attended Midway City Elementary School, where his mother was a member of the PTA. As a student, his intelligence was noted by classmates and teachers. By 1957, Kraft was judged intelligent enough to attend accelerated classes at 17th Street Junior High School. By adolescence, Kraft had been taking a keen interest in politics, becoming a staunch Republican and aspiring to become a U.S. Senator. Shortly after his enrollment at Westminster High School, he and two close friends founded the Westminster World Affairs Club. At Westminster High, Kraft was again regarded as a pleasant, bright student who regularly achieved A grades. He was also known to occasionally date girls, although some classmates and teachers later stated that they suspected Kraft was a homosexual. Kraft later stated he had known from his high school days that he was homosexual, although he initially kept his sexual orientation a secret. On June 13, 1963, he graduated 10th in his class of 390 students. That fall, he enrolled at Claremont Men's College in Claremont, California, where he pursued a Bachelor of Arts degree in economics. Shortly after his enrollment at Claremont, Kraft enrolled in the Reserve Officers Training Corps and regularly attended demonstrations in support of the Vietnam War, and in 1964, campaign rallies for the war. Campaign rallies for Republican presidential candidate Barry Goldwater. He later declared these actions were merely a simulation of his parents' political views and not his own, describing his second year at Claremont as being when he was abandoning the last gasp of his conservative ideology. The same year, Kraft entered his first known homosexual relationship. In 1964, Kraft began working as a bartender at a local Garden Grove cocktail lounge that catered to gay clientele. He was also known to regularly travel to Laguna Beach and Huntington Beach to have casual sex with hustlers. In an apparent tentative effort to reveal his sexual orientation to his parents, Kraft took a succession of male friends to meet his family during his years at Claremont. Initially, Kraft's parents and sisters were oblivious to his homosexuality. In 1966, Kraft was arrested and charged with lewd conduct after propositioning an undercover police officer in Huntington Beach. As he had no previous criminal record, no charges were filed. The following year, he developed a radical shift in his political beliefs, becoming an ardent supporter of liberal views and eventually registered as a Democrat in 1967. Kraft quickly became a Democratic Party organizer, campaigning tirelessly for the election of Robert F. Kennedy and receiving a personal letter from the senator thanking him for his efforts. By his senior year, Kraft had become a lackadaisical student, drinking, taking drugs, and regularly attending all-night gambling and poker sessions with other students. The lack of commitment to his studies in his final year resulted in Kraft's failing to graduate from Claremont in June 1967 and being forced to repeat his econometrics class, which postponed his graduation by 8 months. In February 1968, Kraft graduated from Claremont Men's College with a Bachelor of Arts degree in economics. 4 months after graduating from college, Kraft joined the United States Air Force. He was sent to basic training in Texas before being stationed at Edwards Air Force Base in Southern California, where he supervised the painting of the test planes. During his service in the Air Force, Kraft rose to the rank of Airman First Class and Supervisor Manager. That same year that Kraft became an Airman First Class, he disclosed to his family that he was a homosexual. In a letter he wrote to a friend, Kraft described his father as having flown into a rage, whereas he described his mother as being more understanding, if somewhat disapproving. Kraft's family ultimately accepted his sexuality, and he remained in close contact with his parents and siblings. Although his siblings noted he began to distance himself from his family after he had disclosed his sexuality to them. On July 26, 1969, Kraft received a general discharge from the Air Force after announcing his sexual orientation to his superiors. The discharge was officially listed as being on medical grounds. In response, Kraft sought legal advice from an attorney to challenge the grounds regarding his discharge. The Air Force, however, refused to change the status of his discharge. Following his discharge, Kraft moved back into his parents' home and obtained work as a bartender. In March 1970, Kraft encountered a 13-year-old Westminster youth named Joseph Alvin Fancher at Huntington Beach. Fancher explained to Kraft that he had run away from home that day. Kraft invited the youth to his apartment, promising that Fancher could live with him and offering him sex with the women he claimed to know. Fancher agreed and accompanied Kraft to his Belmont Shore apartment, where he was drugged, beaten, and repeatedly sexually assaulted. Hours later, Fancher escaped from the apartment after Kraft left to go to work. A member of the public, alarmed about Fancher's drug and disavowed condition, called an ambulance. Fancher's stomach needed to be pumped due to his ingested drugs. At the hospital, Fancher informed police that Kraft had given him drugs and beaten him. He did not disclose to either his parents or the police that he had been sexually assaulted, due to shame and fearing no one would believe him. A search of Kraft's apartment was conducted with the cooperation of his roommate. However, as Fancher had confessed to the police, he had taken the pills offered to him voluntarily, and the officers had searched without a warrant, so no charges were filed. Between 1971 and 1983, Kraft is believed to have killed 67 victims. All of his suspected victims were males between the ages of 13 and 35, the majority of whom were in their late teens to mid-20s. Kraft was charged with and convicted of 16 of these homicides, all of which had occurred between 1972 and 1983. Many of his victims were members of the United States Marine Corps, and most of their bodies were found to have high levels of both alcohol and tranquilizers, indicating that they had been unconscious when they were abused and killed. Kraft's victims were typically lured into his vehicle with an offer of a lift or alcohol. Once in Kraft's vehicle, the victims would be plied with alcohol and or other drugs. They were bound, tortured, and sexually abused before they were killed, usually by either strangulation, asphyxiation, or bludgeoning. However, some victims had also ingested lethal doses of pharmaceuticals. At least one victim was stabbed to death. The victims would be then discarded, usually, though not exclusively, alongside or close to various freeways in Southern California. Photographic evidence found at Kraft's home indicates several of his victims were driven to his house before their murder. Many of the victims were burned with a car or cigarette lighter, usually around the genitals, chest, and face, and several were found with extensive blunt force trauma to the face and head. In several instances, foreign objects were found inserted to the victims' rectums, while other victims had suffered emasculation or mutilation and dismemberment. The majority of Kraft's murders were committed in California, although some victims had been killed in Oregon, with 2 further known victims murdered in Michigan in December of 1982. On October 5, 1971, police found the nude body of a 30-year-old Long Beach resident named Wayne Joseph Duquette discarded close to the Ortega Highway. Duquette, a bartender at a gay bar named The Stable in a nearby Sunset Beach, had last been seen alive on September 20th. Putrefaction had been destroyed, any signs of foul play on the body. The cause of death was listed as acute alcohol poisoning due to a high blood alcohol level. The first entry in Kraft's journal, referred to as a scorecard, reads, "Stable," leading investigators to believe Duquette was Kraft's first murder victim. 15 months after the murder of Duquette, Kraft killed a 20-year-old Marine named Edward Daniel Moore. Moore was last seen leaving the barracks at Camp Pendleton on December 24, 1972. His body was found beside the 405 freeway in Seal Beach during the early hours of December 26th. Abrasions on Moore's body indicated that he had been pushed from a moving vehicle. An autopsy revealed that he had been bound at the wrists and ankles, then beaten with a blunt instrument about the face before being garroted. His body also exhibited numerous bite marks, and a sock had been forced into his rectum. 6 weeks after the murder of Moore, on February 6, 1973, the body of an unidentified male, estimated to be between 17 and 25 years old, was found alongside the Terminal Island Freeway in Wilmington. This victim had been strangled with a ligature and also had a sock inserted in his rectum. 2 months later, on April 14th, the body of a 17-year-old Kevin Clark Bailey was found beside a road in Huntington Beach. Bailey had been emasculated and sodomized prior to his murder. By July 28th, a further 2 victims had been murdered. An unidentified youth whose dismembered body was found in Wilmington on April 22nd, and a 20-year-old named Ronnie Jean Weeb, whose strangled body was discarded beside an on-ramp off the 405 freeway on July 30th, 2 days after he had disappeared. Weld marks on Weeb's wrists and ankles suggest he had been bound and suspended from a device before his murder. Kraft is known to have killed at least once more in 1973. The victim was a 23-year-old bisexual art student named Vincent Cruz Maestas, whose body was found on the San Bernardino Mountains on December 29th. As with several previous victims, one of the victim's socks has been forced into his rectum. Maestas' hands had been severed from his body and were never found. By November 1974, 5 more victims had been found beside or close to major roadways in Southern California, 3 of whom had been conclusively linked to the same killer. 2 of these victims, 20-year-old Malcolm Eugene Little and 19-year-old James Dale Reeves, had each been found beside a freeway with foreign objects inserted into their bodies, whereas the body of the 3rd victim, 18-year-old Marine Roger Edward Dickerson, bore evidence of bite marks, much like several earlier victims. On January 3, 1975, Kraft abducted and murdered a 17-year-old high school student named John ller. The youth was last seen boarding a bus in Long Beach. His strangled body was found the following day, discarded at Sunset Beach with a foreign object protruding from his anus. Drag marks along the beach close to where his body was found suggested that 2 individuals had carried Ller's body to the water. 2 weeks after this murder, on January 17th, the body of a 21-year-old named Craig Janitis was found discarded in the parking lot of the Golden Sails Hotel near the Pacific Coast Highway and Loynes Drive in Long Beach. Janitis had been strangled to death with the length of a string, possibly a shoelace. By January 1975, a total of 14 victims, whose bodies had been found discarded across 4 separate counties over the previous 3 years, had been linked to the same killer. All the victims had been Caucasian males with similar physical characteristics. On January 24th, homicide investigators from several jurisdictions in Southern California convened in Orange County to discuss their progress in the hunt for the unknown killer. An FBI profile of the killer was read to investigators, describing the individual as a methodical, organized lust killer, above average intelligence who exhibited an indifference into the interests and welfare of society. Some investigators believe the murders to be the work of more than one individual, one or more of whom who had a military background, as 2 victims had paper tissue residue in their nostrils, a procedure known to be used in the military to prevent bodies from purging after death. The insertion of socks inside the victims' rectums was also theorized to have been intended to prevent purging, as the body was driven to the disposal location. At this stage, investigators had no solid suspects. On the evening of March 29, 1975, Kraft lured 2 youths, Keith Crodwell and Kent May, from a Long Beach parking lot into his Ford Mustang. The youths were given beer and Valium, as Kraft drove in a random, aimless manner around Belmont Shore and Seal Beach. May later recalled feeling catatonic as a result of the Valium and alcohol he had ingested before he passed out. In the parking lot where Crotwell and May had last been seen, two friends of the youths observed the distinctive black and white Mustang pull in and stop before the driver leaned across, opened the passenger door, and pushed the unconscious May out onto the pavement. The driver then sped away from the scene. As he did so, the friends noted Crotwell slumped against the unknown driver's shoulder. On May 8th, Crotwell's skull was found on a jetty close to the Long Beach Marina. The remainder of his body was found 6 months later. After hearing the news, the two friends of Crotwell and May, who suspected that the murderer was a patron of the Belmont Shore gay bar, searched their neighborhood for the distinctive Mustang. They found the car less than a mile from their home, wrote down the license plate number, and gave the information to police. The vehicle was registered to Randy Kraft. Long Beach police questioned Kraft about Crotwell's abduction and murder on May 19, 1975. Initially, he denied having ever met either Crotwell or May, and the police, skeptical of Kraft's denial, summoned him to the police station for further questioning. Kraft admitted that on or about March 29th, he had encountered two youths in the Long Beach parking lot in question and persuaded them to drink alcohol and consume Valium with him as he drove. He claimed to have returned May to the parking lot and then to have driven with Crotwell to a side road close to the El Toro off-ramp, where his car subsequently became embedded upon an embankment. He claimed to have walked alone to a gas station to call a tow truck while Crotwell remained in the car. Upon returning to his vehicle, Kraft claimed Crotwell had disappeared. Although Kraft's roommate confirmed that Kraft had phoned him on the date of Crotwell's disappearance, claiming that his vehicle was stuck on an embankment, detectives remained unconvinced by Kraft's version of the events. The following week, two detectives attempted to file homicide charges against Kraft. However, the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office declined, citing the coroner's conclusion from his autopsy of the remains thus far found, that the youth had died of accidental drowning. Perhaps because he had been questioned as a suspect in Crotwell's murder, and because of additional turmoil in his personal life in the summer of 1975. Kraft is not known to have killed again until December 31st, when he abducted 22-year-old Mark Hall and Sam Juan Capistrano. In this instance, later described by prosecutors as the worst of all of Kraft's unknown murders, Hall was driven to a remote canyon where he was bound to a tree. The autopsy report listed the cause of death as asphyxiation caused by leaves and earth found lodged deep in Hall's trachea. The autopsy also revealed that Hall had been sodomized and emasculated, with his severed genitals inserted into his rectum. Additionally, his chest, scrotum, nose, and cheeks had been burned with an automobile cigarette lighter, which was also used to destroy his eyes. The autopsy report also listed numerous incisions on Hall's legs, which had been inflicted with a broken bottle. Forensic experts were able to determine that Hall had been alive throughout much of the ordeal. The last known victim murdered by Kraft in 1978 was a 21-year-old Long Beach truck driver named Michael Joseph Ender Baton, whose castrated body was found along an on-ramp in the I-605 on November 18, 1978. In addition to having been castrated, Ender Baton had been violated with a foreign object and had suffered burns similar to those inflicted on victim Mark Hall 2 years previously. The cause of death was listed as suffocation. Kraft is not known to have killed again until June 16, 1979, when he abducted a 20-year-old Marine named Donnie Harold Crissell, whose body was thrown from a moving vehicle onto the 405 freeway. The cause of death was listed as acute alcohol poisoning, although rope burn and burn marks indicated Crissell had been bound and tortured prior to his body being discarded. 2 months later, on August 29th, the dismembered remains of a 21-year-old English tourist named Keith Anthony Jackson were found discarded in 2 trash bags in a cardboard box behind a Union 76 gas station in Long Beach. A sock was found inserted in his rectum. Only Jackson's head, torso, and left leg were never found. Jackson had been deceased for several days prior to the discovery of his body. The entry on Kraft's scorecard simply reading either England or 76 is believed to refer to him. 2 weeks later, on September 14th, the body of 19-year-old Gregory Wallace Jolly was found in Lake Arrowhead. Jolly had been emasculated and his head and legs had been severed after death. His possessions were later found in Kraft's home. On November 24, 1979, a 15-year-old Santa Ana youth named Jeffrey Sayer is believed to have been abducted and murdered by Kraft. Sayer was last seen at a bus stop in Westminster while returning home from a date with his girlfriend. The bus stop Sayer was last seen at was near the home of Kraft's parents. The entry, Westminster date, on Kraft's scorecard is believed to refer to Sayer. On February 18, 1980, the decapitated body of a 19-year-old Marine named Mark Allen Marsh was found near the Templin Highway. Marsh was last seen hitchhiking towards Buena Park. His hands had been severed from his body after death. In the summer of 1980, Kraft traveled to the neighboring state of Oregon on an extended business trip. During this trip, he lived in a town close to Portland. Before returning to California in August, he is believed to have murdered 2 more victims, both whom were listed on his scorecard with cryptic references, including the word Portland. The first victim, a 17-year-old Denver youth named Michael Sean O'Fallon, was killed on July 17th. O'Fallon had been on a solo hitchhiking trip across the U.S. and Canada before his enrollment at college at the time of his murder. He had consumed both alcohol and Valium before he was strangled to death. O'Fallon's nude hog-tied body was discovered 10 miles south of Salem. O'Fallon was listed on Kraft's scorecard as Portland, Denver, and his camera inscribed with his mother's initials was later found in Kraft's garage. The following day, Kraft is believed to have killed a man estimated to be aged between 35 and 45 years old, whose body was found beside a freeway in the city of Woodburn. This victim, listed as Portland Elk on Kraft's scorecard, had ingested a toxic level of Valium and Tylenol before he was strangled to death with a ligature. On September 3, 1980, 1 month after Kraft's return to California from Oregon, the bound body of a 19-year-old Marine named Robert Loggins was found discarded in a trash bag close to the El Toro Marine Air Base. Loggins had last been seen alive by 2 fellow Marines close to the Pacific Highway on August 23rd. Photographs and negatives subsequently found in Kraft's possession show Loggins in Kraft's living room slumped fully clothed on his sofa, apparently intoxicated and in various nude pornographic postures. All these pictures depict Loggins with his eyes closed. It is unknown whether the victim was alive or dead when they were taken. On April 10, 1981, the body of a 17-year-old youth named Michael Cluck was found beside the Interstate 5 freeway close to Goshen, Oregon. Cluck had been abducted while hitchhiking from Kent, Washington to Bakersfield, California, the day prior to his body being discovered. 31 blunt force blows to the head had destroyed the back of his skull, killing the youth. Cluck had also been sodomized and savagely beaten, kicked, and scoured. Cluck is believed to have been recorded on Kraft's scorecard as Portland blood due to the extensive blood and debris found at the murder scene. At the time of the murder, Kraft had once again been sent on assignment to Oregon by his employers. In addition, on the day Cluck's body was discovered, Kraft visited a Lane County hospital to receive treatment for a bruised foot. 4 months after Cluck's murder, on August 20th, 1981, the partially clothed body of 17-year-old male prostitute Christopher Allen Williams was found in the San Bernardino Mountains. Williams had ingested both phenobarbital and benzodiazepine, was found with tissue paper lodged deep in his nostrils, causing him to choke to death on his own mucus. Following complaints from residents of Echo Park regarding a foul odor emanating from the direction of the Hollywood Freeway on July 29, 1982, a Caltrans employee found the decaying body of a 14-year-old Pittsburgh, California youth named Raymond Davis, discarded alongside the Rampart Boulevard off-ramp. Rudimentary efforts had been made to conceal Davis's body beneath leaves and soil. He had last been seen alive in Echo Park on June 17th, searching for his missing dog. The youth's wrists had been knotted behind his back, in much the same manner as had victim Michael O'Fallon 2 years previously, and he had been strangled to death with his shoelace. The entry on Kraft's scorecard reading, "Dog," is believed to refer to Davis. Just 40 feet from Davis's body, the same Caltrans crew also found the body of 16-year-old Robert Avila. Avila had been missing since July 21st, and his body was also markedly decomposed. He had been strangled to death with the length of a stereo speaker wire. Kraft is not known to have killed again until November 1st, 1982, when he abducted and murdered a 21-year-old Modesto man named Arn McHale Lane. Lane was last seen hitchhiking towards Orange County in search of work. His body was not found until January 1984, discarded on a hillside close to the town of Ramona. 4 weeks after Lane's murder, the semi-nude body of 26-year-old Brian Witcher was dumped from a moving vehicle alongside the Interstate 5 highway, close to the city of Wilsonville, Oregon. Witcher had ingested high levels of both alcohol and Valium, but he died of asphyxiation. On December 3, 1982, a 29-year-old carpenter named Anthony Jose Silveria disappeared while hitchhiking towards Medford. His body was found 2 weeks later, strangled, sodomized, and violated with foreign objects before his murder. At the time of the murders, both Witcher and Silveira, Kraft was again known to have been in Oregon on a business trip, which concluded the day of Silveira's death. On December 4th, Kraft drove from Portland to Seattle to visit friends. During this brief visit, he was observed wearing a military jacket inscribed with the name Silveira. On December 5th, Kraft flew from Seattle to Grand Rapids, Michigan, again on business. 2 days after his arrival in Grand Rapids, Kraft encountered cousins Dennis Alt and Christopher Schoenborn at a seminar in the Amway Grand Plaza Hotel. Kraft was seen talking with the pair in the hotel's reception area shortly before midnight. Their bodies were discovered on December 9th in an open field close to the hotel. Both victims had been plied with alcohol and Valium before their sodomy and murder, and the bodies had been arranged in sexually suggestive positions. Alt, age 24, had died of asphyxiation, whereas Schoenborn, age 20, had been strangled to death with his belt. In addition, a ballpoint pen had been inserted to Schoenborn's urethra before his murder. Both victims were recorded upon Kraft's scorecard in a single entry reading GR2. A set of keys belonging to Schoenborn plus Silveira's military jacket were left by Kraft in the motel. On December 8th, Kraft traveled from Michigan to Portland. Within 24 hours of his return to Oregon, he had killed a 19-year-old hitchhiker named Lance Taggs. Taggs had last been seen hitchhiking from the city of Tigard to the home of a relative in Los Angeles on December 8th. His body was discovered the following day, discarded alongside a rural road in Clackamas County, close to where the body of Witcher had been found just 2 weeks earlier. As with Alt and Schoenborn, Taggs had consumed alcohol and Valium before his murder. Although Taggs had died of suffocation caused by a sock thrust into his trachea, noting the passage of time between periods of activity when bodies of young males had been found discarded near mass transportation with alcohol and or pharmaceuticals in their bloodstream in Oregon, investigators theorized that their killer resided in another state and struck in Oregon only when they're on business. Following the murders of Silveria, Witcher, and Taggs, Oregon investigators relayed the details of the murders to police in other states. Describing the MO of the killer, they were seeking and requesting feedback from any police force that had unsolved murders of young males on their files with similar characteristics. A response from Southern California counties was swift. The pattern of killings was identical to victims linked to the unknown killer in California. The 6 Oregon murders committed by Kraft were thus linked to the murders he had committed in California. At 1:10 a.m. on May 14, 1983, 2 California Highway Patrol officers observed a Toyota Celica driving erratically on Interstate 5 in the Orange County community of Mission Viejo. Observing the vehicle perform an illegal lane change, the officers, suspecting the motorist was driving under the influence, signaled the vehicle to a stop. The driver slowed the vehicle to a halt and exited the car, discarding the contents of a beer bottle onto the pavement as he did so. Officer Michael Sterling met the individual, who was identified himself as Randy Kraft, at the front of his patrol car and observed that his jeans were unbuttoned. Sterling had Kraft perform a field sobriety test, which he failed. He then arrested Kraft for driving while intoxicated. Sterling's partner, Sergeant Michael Howard, approached the Celica and observed the young man slumped with his eyes closed in the vehicle's passenger seat, partially covered by a jacket. Several empty Moosehead beer bottles and an open prescription bottle of lorazepam tablets were strewn around his feet. Howard attempted to wake the man, receiving no response. Howard attempted to rouse the man by shaking his arm, only to note the individual had a low body temperature. Upon checking for a pulse, Howard noted the man was dead, with a ligature mark visible around his neck. Lifting the jacket from the victim's lap, Howard noted the victim's jeans had been opened to expose his genitalia. In addition, the victim's hands had been bound with a shoelace, and his wrists bore evidence of welt marks. Later identified as Terry Lee Gambrill, a 25-year-old Marine stationed at El Toro Air Base, the victim had been strangled to death. Kraft was initially charged with driving under the influence of alcohol and was held in custody as detectives conducted a thorough search of his vehicle. Upon the car's rear seat, investigators found a belt, the width of which matched the bruising around Gambrill's neck. Other incriminating evidence included alcohol, tranquilizers, various prescription drugs, and stimulants. The passenger seat and the carpet of the vehicle were heavily blood-stained. However, Gambrill had no open wounds. The upholstery was removed for forensic analysis, which confirmed the blood was human. Beneath the carpet, investigators discovered an envelope containing more than 50 photographs of young men in pornographic poses. Many of the subjects in the pictures appeared to be either asleep or dead. Inside the trunk, investigators found a ring binder containing a handwritten list of 61 coded notations. A search of Kraft's home revealed further incriminating evidence, including clothes and personal possessions of numerous young men who had been murdered over the previous decade. Fibers taken from a rug matched those found on victim Scott Hughes. In addition, the couch in Kraft's living room was identified as being the one in the photographs found in Kraft's car. A roll of film discovered also contained shots of victims Eric Church and Roger Duvall sitting in Kraft's car. A ligature mark is clearly visible on Duvall's neck in one of these images. The coded list of 61 nearly printed terms and phrases found in the trunk of Kraft's car is believed to refer to each of Kraft's victims. Many entries appear innocuous, but each is believed to refer to a specific murder victim or double murder. Several entries reference victims' names. In other instances, entries indicate torture or mutilation inflicted upon victims' bodies and or the locations where they were last seen. The entry, Marine Head BP, for example, is believed to refer to victim Mark Marsh, a Marine found decapitated, having last seen hitchhiking towards Buena Park. Other entries simply refer to a body dump locations. The entry Golden Sails, for example, refers to the fact the body of Craig Janitis was found in the parking lot of Golden Sails Hotel. The list also contains entries indicating a minimum of 4 double murders. GR2, 2-in-1 Beach, 2-in-1 Hitch, and 2-in-1 MV to PL. Investigators contend that 2 victims, of whose murders Kraft was convicted, Church and Gambrill, are not listed on Kraft's scorecard. However, since the list is in code, the possibility exists that Church in particular is included on the scorecard as an entry that investigators cannot recognize as referring to him. Gambrill may also be included on the list. Although Kraft was arrested while he attempted to dispose of the body, he may not have recorded an entry referring to Gambrill on his scorecard. These possibilities indicate the scorecard lists a minimum of 65 and possibly 67 victims. Kraft's trial began on September 26, 1988. He was tried in Orange County before Judge Donald A. McCartan. At the trial, almost 160 witnesses were called to testify on behalf of the prosecution. Over 1,000 exhibits were introduced as evidence. These exhibits included physical evidence, such as bloodstains, hair and fiber evidence found at Kraft's Long Beach residence and in his car, fingerprints found upon glass shards recovered from the Hall murder scene, negatives and photographs of victims found hidden inside Kraft's vehicle, which depicted men either dead, drugged, or asleep, the belt used to strangle Gambrill, the prescription drugs and buck knife found in his vehicle. Other evidence introduced included work and travel records and gasoline receipts, which placed Kraft in particular locations where victims had been abducted and or discarded, and the numerous personal possessions of various murder victims found in Kraft's possession following his arrest. Kraft's defense was primarily one of alibis and alternate suspects. His attorneys dismissed much of the evidence produced as being circumstantial and attempted to portray Kraft as an articulate, hardworking, and upstanding member of the community. They did not dispute that the 16 men were murdered victims, yet argued that they were victims of someone, but not Randy Kraft. The defense also pointed out that investigators had initially believed several of the 16 victims to have been killed by one of two other serial killers, Patrick Kearney and William Bonin, and argued that there was no concrete evidence that Kraft had killed any of the victims. The trial lasted a total of 13 months and would prove to be the most expensive trial in Orange County history. On April 29, 1989, each side opened their closing arguments, which lasted a total of 3 days. The prosecution again listing all the physical and circumstantial evidence pointing to Kraft's guilt. The defense arguing as to circumstantial evidence case put forward by the prosecution that all murders were linked, and accusing the prosecution of glossing over the truth. Following the closing arguments, the jury deliberated for 11 days before reaching their verdict. On May 12, 1989, Kraft was found guilty of 16 counts of murder, 1 count of sodomy, and 1 count of emasculation. On August 11, 1989, the jury rendered a verdict of death. 3 months later, on November 29th, Judge McCartan formally sentenced Kraft to death. The sentence was upheld by the California Supreme Court on August 9, 2000. As of 2023, Kraft remains on death row at San Quentin State Prison. He continues to deny responsibility for any of the homicides he was either convicted of or suspected of committing. For more content, like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Thank you.